All right, another video book review. This one is for Christopher Buehlman's Blacktongue Thief, a fantasy novel set in a whole new world from anything I've read, right? And I haven't heard really anything about it other than that I think I saw a video where it was recommended, and that's kind of it, right? It was just recommended. And, what the heck? I have Kindle Unlimited. It was free. Tried it. So I read it, and it was, I think, almost close to a perfect, like, modern fantasy. And what I mean by modern fantasy, I guess in that sense, is very grim, very dark, very unpleasant, grody, uncaring world, that kind of thing, where you see a lot in these fantasy novels where, you know, everyone wants to be George R. R. Martin. Everyone wants to be Joe Abercrombie. And you even see in the acknowledgments at the end of this book, like he says, yeah, George and Joe, they're the ones who kind of inspire me, So he does that, but he does something that I think beats out Joe in the quality, in that with Joe, and I noticed this when I finished and thought about it, I with Abercrombie's work, and I've read, just for context, I've read the first three books, The Blade Itself, Before They're Hanged, and Last Argument of Kings, and then the next book, Best Served Cold. I read all three of those. I haven't read anything else, right? I plan on it, but I've read all three of those, and I disliked all of them except for the second book. Anyways, they were all a world of filth, a world of grime. Everything was gross, including the characters. Them at their core, every character was kind of gross too, and there was no diamond in the rough. In this book, Blacktongue Thief, there is a diamond in the rough because all of that set is true, but the characters themselves are gems. They are gems that, at least the ones we're following, that all have, there are noble characteristics about them. There are things that you will support them for, not just that they're, tough or realistic, or they see the way of the world and then they act accordingly and then succeed because of it, like you see in other things. This is, oh, our main character is a thief, but he has morals, clearly defined morals, and he does act on them, and you say, oh, I like you, man, you're a good guy. That feeling never happens in the Blade Itself, the whatever, that first law world or whatever, and I just despise that in my books. So I really like that about this book. There were diamonds in the rough. Next, the world, like the well, since we're on the character, I guess the characters are all, I like, you don't notice it at least as quickly as you would in, like, the Ryan Cahill, The Bound and the Broken, where you are introduced to your little group, your party, and you're like, all right, that's the kind of fighter, that's the mage, that's the ranger, archer type. These are the archetypes of the cast. But put that down. But in this book, you kind of have that. You definitely have that, right? Where you have Galva is the fighter tank. Then you have, what is that? He's got like a couple names. It's weird, but our main character, the Black Tongue Thief, I just always thought of him as the Black Tongue Thief. It starts with I think it's Canth or Kith or something. Anyways, he's obviously the ranger, archer, thief, and then Noragal is the mage, the witch, right? And the characters all work so well that you see past. You don't even notice the archetypes for a bit. They're just the characters, and it makes sense why they are what they are. And you're very invested in them as characters too. They feel, layered. They feel much more layered than. And I'm thinking of a Ryan Cahill book now, and I wasn't thinking before, but now I'm thinking that I'm like, the Ryan Cahill, at least the first book, everyone kind of just felt like Aragon. Like, everyone kind of didn't feel like a person. They just felt like a character. And that's not the case. They felt like people. It was very nice. I actually really enjoyed that. The first scene where you're introduced to the Black Tongue Thief, and he wants to attack Galva and steal. Well, he's told to steal with his group that he's in. You get a great introduction to those two. You get a great introduction when you get to the where Norgal shows up. There, it's not just everyone finds each other in a bar kind of thing or inn. Yeah, very very interesting. I really liked the characters. They go on a big quest. It's a quest from one side. I didn't look at the map. I don't really look at maps anymore because it's on Kindle and I'd have to go all the way to the back and forward. I just don't care about the maps anymore. But you do realize that they go from one point across multiple like countries. They sail, they climb mountains to get to where they're going. So it's a big quest fantasy. And that quest fantasy feels rewarding. It feels everywhere feels new, everywhere feels different, different set pieces, different everything, right? And I really like that because not the chapters weren't very long. You felt like you did something every single one of them. Very short, very choppy, very very good. You kept the momentum going very well. The action was pretty solid. It was very few and far between actually, and you spent more time with character interaction, which I also appreciate. But when the action did come, and it was pretty interesting. It wasn't like the blow your mind kind of action, but it was serviceable. The conclusion was a conclusion, at least for this. Like it wasn't you get to the end and before anything is resolved, now to the next book. Like you have a clear set of hey, we need to do this thing at the end of the quest. That happens, that resolves in whichever way it happens, and then the world opens up, and that leads to new things open up, and that leads to the possibilities in the future. It doesn't leave you hanging just for that. So it feels also like a if you wanted to read it as one book, you could, is what it feels like. And I understand that there's a second book, Daughter's War, but it happens before as with Galva as the main character. The fantastical nature of this was so fantastical and so mysterious in a lot of ways that it felt like a fable. It felt like a kid's story almost, but come to life, and you actually see like all the stuff in the kid's story happened, but what if real people and real situations were put into it? The goblins are weird fish things. The giants are real. You don't really see too much of the giants, but magic and spells and like the gods, like all being real and having real effects. Like that's very interesting, and it really lent itself to the fantastical nature. It's not just some medieval world and people think there's magic there or there's like very little magic or there's people jumping off of walls or something like that could happen, and maybe that does happen in this book, but it all feels it's so set up and fantastical that it's and you're through the eyes of someone with a little bit of knowledge but not too much, and it definitely feels mysterious enough for you to be like wowed all the time. And that's what I really liked. I don't like not being wowed. I don't like knowing the every little thing that the magic can do, and then now I'm like, all right, this is kind of like a puzzle, or hey, let's figure out how this person's going to utilize all these like stats to go through this, or if they do it, I'm like, oh, that makes sense. Like it's not very interesting to me. Like I'll just read something else. With this, like it's very you get surprised with a lot of the magic, and that's a part of fantasy. Like I want to be surprised and wowed by the things, the creative things that can come out and not see it coming, or at least you know I don't want to have to logically follow it because and it's not that I don't want to put like brain effort into it. It's just that I want there to be some surprise and mystery and whimsy in my fantasy. God forbid. I don't know. I don't know if I explained that too well because there are places for you know there are places for that other stuff. However, I do prefer this way better. Let's see. The characters are great. The dialogue, it was like a very funny book. It wanted to be funny. It really did, and I chuckled maybe like 3 or 4 times during it, like under my breath. Nothing like big. I'm not laughing out loud, but it was a sardonic kind of feeling to it, and that was interesting to read. It was good to read. It kept it kind of lighthearted in ways, but it wasn't too heavy because of it. And there were some heavy things that happened in this book, and I think the balance of that was really well done. It wasn't jarring to go from like humor to gruesome death to sadness to more funny, and it wasn't like a Marvel movie like that where you're kind of taken aback by a lot of it. This, like, it felt real. That's what I mean by the characters felt real, because they behave real. The humor feels real, even if you're not going to laugh at it. It feels real, and it's not there just to, make the audience laugh and to cut the tension for no other reason than to cut the tension. It like has purpose, and it really lends to the character. Let's think. What else? All that stuff is solid. The world, the story's solid. The humor, dialogue is really good. Like, the humor is really good. Dialogue is, it feels natural, so you're not. It doesn't feel stilted, so that's really nice. It's fluid. I think the only thing that hurts it, in a big, not in a big way, but there's a lot thrown at you, like so much thrown at you in the beginning and during it. I just decided during that, like, very specific things about gods, rules between these different cultures. It's a big world and a lot's going on in it. And I kind of let all of that stuff wash over me in a lot of ways. Unless it's repeated multiple times, then I'll pay attention, obviously. But there's a lot thrown at you. And if you try and sit down and pay attention to every little thing and try to connect all these dots, I feel like you won't have that good of a time, because there's just so much world building thrown at you some of the time, a lot of the time, actually. And I found in fantasy that if I don't pay attention to every little thing anymore, I've put all my juices, my mental juices, into Tolkien, and the expanded nature of that. Everything else afterwards, I'm like, all right, if they repeat it, they repeat it. I'll pay attention, and it will come. But if it happens only a little bit, if it's good enough, I'll reread it and then I'll care about it. But so far, that hasn't happened for any of these books. But that's, if you want to, I guess, sit down and pay attention to everything, this will slow you down. But if you don't, just power through the book, it won't matter that much. It won't matter really at all for enjoyment. It didn't matter for my enjoyment at all. I really enjoyed the book. Classic fantasy meets modern writing and modern kind of cynicism in some ways, but there is a heart to it. There is nobility to these characters and to the world in a lot of ways. There's meaning. It's not nihilism run amok and now I'm supposed to care about something. Like, no, it's not that. It cares. Things matter. It's a classic tale done a little bit differently and more modern and more interesting than a lot of these fantasies that I've read. So with that, I will give it a score before I end. And that score, I think, is going to be just pure enjoyment and everything else on top of it. 8.5. I think it was a much better than average fantasy. Much, much better than average. That surprised me. I came in with zero expectations. And I only saw one or two reviews after I finished the book and wrote my own thing for it. And I see that a lot of people aren't as enthusiastic as I am. They're very much like, yeah, it's good, but it's not that good. And I see what they're coming from. But they also really enjoy Joe Abercrombie. They really do. And I don't. So maybe my enjoyment, my extra enjoyment, comes from that difference that I have with others. And I know I mention it. It feels like I mention it all the time, but Joe Abercrombie and the Blade itself and the First Law is so in my mind as a standard of modern grimdark, as it is for everyone. But for me, it's just not good. So that's always a benchmark to me, and it seems to affect what I read, and it is the benchmark that things must be worked against. So yeah, 8.5. Super enjoyed it. Would recommend it to everyone, really everyone. And yeah, that's it. 8.5. Go ahead, read it. It's free on Kindle Unlimited, and it's also at local libraries. So go ahead and put a hold on those. Anyway, still in North Carolina. Hair's getting longer. Need to cut it soon. Still North Carolina. Asheville. So now you need to move soon. You'll see hopefully a different background. I keep mentioning it. Maybe one day it'll be true. But for now, on to the next book.